You need to write the story that you want to tell. That is how we write books. If you write a book for somebody else, it's going to fall flat. It's not going to feel good. And people are going to be able to tell that it's fake, that you wrote it with somebody else's experience in mind, as opposed to writing it because you had to write it. Hey, sunshine. Welcome back to another episode and another month of the Neurodivergent Creative Podcast. It's March 1st. And if you are listening to this on March 1st, the day that it is coming out, then it is not too late for you to join Novel Parkour, my 5-day novel outlining challenge, ideal for ADHD and ADHD writers. So we are going to be hopping and skipping over your plot holes and making everything work so that you have a functional outline to get you through your first draft. Okay, that's my pitch that I had to do while I'm petting my dog. So head on over to askfishfisher.com and jump in if you are listening to this today. We are having a daily hour-long call Friday through Tuesday, every day, noon Eastern time. So you just missed the intro if you're listening today. So hop on in and outline your novel with us. Awesome. Okay, so today's topic is the 3 major roadblocks to finishing your first draft. So it can be very hard when you are neurodivergent, especially if you were in like the gifted and talented programs growing up in school. And I think that we've talked about this already, but the fact that we're so used to just knowing like what a teacher wants, knowing what the rubric wants, that we can just write to the assignment and get an A. Writing a book is not like that at all. And I had to do a lot of work personally to understand that this didn't mean that I was a bad writer. It meant that writing a book is way more complicated than writing a paper. Okay, so we're going to start there. And when I work with clients, they tend to come up against like 3 major themes or 3 major roadblocks, which is how I'm going to describe them, on this epic road trip and journey to the destination of your finished book. Okay? Yeah, we don't have to hit every single scenic outlook on the first draft. You're probably not going to. You want to get really used to the route. You want to be familiar with where you're headed before you know where, oh, I can turn down here. We can take a shortcut over here. I actually know this really beautiful scenic highway that is only adds half an hour and is super beautiful and will give us cool things to look at. I'm going hard on the road trip metaphor. It's fine. So all of that to say is that your first draft is not the final, can you say final destination without making a bunch of millennials scared of logs? Your first draft is not going to be the same as your final draft of your book, the finished version, the published version. It's different. And that's so hard to explain because we don't often see first drafts. We don't see this process. We don't see it modeled. We see finished media and we're like, hell yeah, I love this media. I want to create it. Not understanding that it's a very iterative process to get to the final draft of a book, a movie, a script, a play, like any of this entertaining creative media that we absorb. It takes time. So I'm going to jump into the 3 roadblocks. Number 1 is getting all up in your first draft feelings and comparing them to finished books. So this is going to show up with very like comparison-based judgment of yourself. Like, oh, well, I'm not as good as Stephen King, or I'm not as good as this other writer that I love. I need to do better. This is garbage. If you are comparing your first draft to a finished product, you're never going to get anywhere because it's not the same. You're comparing apples to oranges. It is perfectionist disaster. And remember that a first draft, we're only aiming for like 30% good. And if you missed that, if you missed the description of why 30% good, you should go back to episode 115 about the bare minimum book outline. Okay. So that goes into why we're only really aiming for a first draft to be 30% good. Now, it's going to come up. Like, I can say this to you and you can be like, you know what? That makes sense, Caitlin. But then when you start writing it, you're still going to come up against those comparisons. So how you work through this is really like getting yourself into the mindset of what your first draft is for and what your first draft should look like. So I like this actually came up in a working title call recently, which was like, how do you stay motivated when you're in like the revision process and it's not as fun as making new stuff? So I'm getting a little ahead of myself here, but that question did come up this past week. And I really like looking to well-known published authors for their quotes on revision or their quotes on outlining or their quotes on first drafts. Jordan Peele, he's had a quote going like a little viral recently because I can tell because like 4 people have sent it to me. And he said that when I'm working on the first draft, I have to remind myself that I'm just shoveling sand into a box or into a bucket so that I can make sandcastles with it later. That is dope. That is the perfect way to think about a first draft. You are getting all of the materials together. You are telling yourself the story. And the first draft might read like you woke up from a dream and you're trying to tell somebody the details of that dream, but they're like fading away from you. Only it's in reverse. So when you have that story idea, even if you know more details in your heart that are making it onto the page, the process is more like getting down sort of the ghosty sketch of it, the dream version, and then later bringing those details in. So when you wake up from a dream, the details are quickly evaporating, but when you're writing, the further you go into the draft, the more those details solidify, which is awesome. I love that. So your second major roadblock is people pleasing. And by people pleasing, I mean writing for the reader, writing the book that you think people will buy, writing the book that you think people want to read. And I will tell you that I have been there and I have done this, and it gave me a lot of shame. So when I was writing The Gaslighting of the Millennial Generation, which is my debut book, it's nonfiction. Now, we don't need to go into all my genre existential crises about being like, can I do nonfiction and fiction? Yes, you can. And it's not that big a deal. But when I was writing it, I was worried about people reacting poorly to my more kind of progressive ideas. And in a book called The Gaslighting of the Millennial Generation, you would think that I was over that already, but I was not. I wanted to bring them in with a really like cutting headline like that, a really good title, and then kind of like softly educate. And if I were to write that again now, no, it would be harsh and it would be cutting, and I would not care so much about like making some random Republican upset. Whatever, who cares? I'm just going to talk. So I was so worried about saying like that I was an anti-capitalist. And at the time, I didn't think that I was. I have since gone lefter and become more radicalized. And I do really identify with the anti-capitalist ideal. I think that capitalism is squeezing our creativity out of us, is forcing us to do a lot of shit for the sake of productivity and like being managed that is not inherent to who we are as people. And like, it sucks out there. It sucks out there. And so I think that capitalism is bad, and capitalism is kind of draining us of our humanity. But when you say I'm an anti-capitalist, you're going to get people who are mad about it. And I wasn't ready for people to be mad about it. And so I kind of like hedged my bets. I was like, so I'm not really an anti-capitalist because, you know, I'm fine with the exchange of goods and services for money. That's not capitalism. That's commerce. That's how people make an economy. It doesn't have to be a capitalist system. So blah, blah, blah. This is not about capitalism. This is about my book. I wrote it so that people wouldn't get mad at me. And I wrote it to kind of protect the feelings of the people who would be mad at me if I wrote my honest opinions. In retrospect, the book is not for them. The end. If people don't like your book, then it's not a book for them. Like, I have read books I don't like, and I don't sit around thinking like, wow, that author has really personally wronged me. If you have ever DNF'd a book, which is do not finish if you are new to the DNF lingo, if you've ever just stopped reading a book because you're like, I don't really care for this, or if you read a book in high school and you were like, I did not like reading that book, dude, you're not going to like every book you read. And thus, the corollary is that not everybody is going to like your book. So you got to get over the fact that not everybody's going to like your book. You're not going to impress everybody. You're not going to be the genre for everybody. You're not going to be the style or the voice for everybody, which is why people pleasing is not, it's gonna cock block your book. Okay. You need to write the story that you want to tell. That is how we write books. If you write a book for somebody else, it's going to fall flat. It's not going to feel good. And people are going to be able to tell that it's fake, that you wrote it with somebody else's experience in mind, as opposed to writing it because you had to write it. So remember, first draft, you're telling yourself the story. So in your first draft, the people-pleasy parts don't even really need to come into play, because who cares? You're just shaping it. Easier said than done. The third major roadblock that I see, especially because I have ADHD and many of my clients have ADHD, is when we get the shiny object syndrome. When we give up when it gets hard, or we give up because we're scared of the future of the project beyond our comfort zone, or we give up because we had a different idea and that feels better. We should do that one. And then when we do that one, we get a little ways in, and then we have another idea, and then we go do that one because that one's better. Thus, leaving behind a beautiful just wave of good intentions and half-finished ideas. Okay, we don't want that. It's fine to get into a project and then realize, no, this is not what I want to be working on right now. And then you shelve that and go pick up a project that you do want to be working on. What we don't want to do is just haphazardly keep abandoning projects because you're not quite sure how to stick with one. So ADHD definitely plays a part here. And this is where my technique of the idea parking lot comes into play. So the parking lot is for anything that does not pertain to your current objective. So if your current objective is write your first draft, and you have questions about getting an agent, or you have questions about beta readers or sensitivity readers and stuff like that, I'm going to tell you to park those. I'm going to say those are not for the first draft. When you get into revision, we can start talking about those then. Because honestly, you don't need to know. It's just going to stress you out right now. Now that I have people in the writing incubator working title that have been here for a full year and have renewed and are getting close to the end of their revision and needing to know about querying and agents and stuff, now I answer those questions instead of parking them because they are pertinent. But for the people who are just starting out, I make sure to tell them at the beginning of any of those questions, like, you guys don't need to know this yet, but those questions will be like in the vault of knowledge that they can access later, which is helpful. Also, with this parking lot approach, you can put stuff in your parking lot that is not related to your book. So say you're working on your first draft and you're like, oh, I should design my own deck of Oracle cards. Okay. Is that something that you want to do right now? Or is that an idea that you can park while you're working on this book, etc.? So like my shiny object list or my idea parking lot is, I have a lot of ideas on it, and a lot of them are books. And then once I'm done with my novel, I can bring a book out of the parking lot and work on that. Another benefit of the parking lot is that it gives you the kind of dopamine of checking off and completing a task just by adding it to the list. So that's going to give your brain a little something that says, okay, I've handled this. I did something toward that goal or toward that idea. Even if you never pick it back up again, your brain is going to feel more settled having been able to set that down somewhere safe. So just want to like recap everything. You're going to have the first draft, like comparison feelings. That's like the number one roadblock that I see is people being like, it's just not as good as all the books that I read growing up. And I'm like, yeah, that makes sense. If you read the first draft of that book, you wouldn't have this problem. Your second thing is people pleasing and writing with the reader in mind. That's not what this is about. You have to write the story that is on your heart. You have to write the story for you. And then it connects with readers because they can feel the passion of it. Magic tricks. And then 3 is when you see a little shiny object and you're like, oh, that idea definitely feels better than this idea. Okay, that's fine. That's valid. That's normal. Let's write it down and go back to it later. We're going to park that idea in the idea parking lot or on your shiny object list, whatever you want to call it. I compared it to like a grocery cart. one time when I was explaining it. So it's like when you go into the grocery store and you don't need a cart, so you're just like holding a few items, and then you pick up too many things, and then you're holding this like whole really like unwieldy pile of items that you can't set down because you don't want to leave anything behind. You don't want anything to get messy or lost. But also you're like, man, I really should have got a cart. The parking lot allows you to have a cart in advance so that when you start grabbing cool ideas, you have somewhere to put them and then you can get them later. It's not perfect because a shopping cart is not a long-term thing, but whatever. Take the analogy if it works for you. So those are my 3 main roadblocks to finishing your first draft that I have seen time and time again with clients. And also myself, like I cannot deny that these are all my problems too, which is how I know them so intimately. And also how I can advise you to work through them, because that's how I have to go back to these strategies again and again and be like, the story's not for other people. The story's for me. Got to write for me. And the first draft, comparison feelings, things like that, like no stranger. We all get book jealous. So those are the 3 roadblocks. Let me know which one resonates with you most and which one has made you stop writing before, because I'm pretty sure that one of these has reared its ugly head in your life at some point or another. So let me know. Let's start a conversation about it. And again, if you are listening to this on March 1st, get into novel parkour. You're going to love it. It's going to be amazing. Okay, fellow storytellers, there is one thing that I want you to take with you. The fact that your story matters and you deserve to write it down. Are you going to let the inner perfectionist hold you back because you're afraid of getting a little bit messy along the way? Or are you ready to embrace the chaotic, messy, beautiful experience of your first draft, knowing that wherever you start is good enough to begin? Let me tell you about a game changer, my working title writing incubator. This is a 12-month writing incubator. It is not just a course. It is not just any old program. This is the place where your authorly dreams take flight. And as always, it is developed by a neurodivergent, disabled, queer writer, so you know it is top tier shit. Inside the incubator, I am pulling out all the stops to make your book inevitable. The only thing missing is your decision to come aboard and say yes to your book. Join Working Title today, and we'll turn your story into reality, one chapter at a time. Your book deserves a spot on that shelf, and it is time for you to claim it. So visit workingtitlestudio.com to take the first step towards finally finishing that first draft. Your story belongs in the world. So let's make it happen. As always, I want to shout out my amazing podcast production team, the Pancake Copycats, who specialize in marketing support for neurodivergent entrepreneurs, and songwriter Ashton Powers for writing and performing my intro. I'll see you later.